Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we might have some background noise because we're having festivities here soon in honor of the 15th of the month of Av, which is a huge celebration on the Jewish calendar. And we're having big festivities here tonight. So it's going to be starting right after we finish our class. So the setting up, etc. Hopefully won't interfere too much. All right, we are in the path of the righteous Gentile in the middle of page 44. We're up to number 18. So we're discussing now some things which are not what one would necessarily think are part of the seven. Because as we've mentioned many times, the seven are general terms. And I hope that the fans background does not really disturb. I think it's, the doors open. Yeah. Sorry about that. Although there's seven, but as we mentioned many times, those are general. And there are many things which fall into those categories, or just in general, they fall into the very general category based on the verse in Yeshaya and Isaiah that the world was not created for tohu, for chaos, but rather l'sheves, to make it a civilized, proper world. So therefore, there are other commandments which B'nai Noachites are obligated. And then there's a discussion as to how are they obligated if they're not one of the seven, or why are there not more than seven? But be that as it may, last time, I think the last thing we discussed was honoring father and mother. So even though it's one of the 613 commandments for the Jew, it does apply for the Noachite. Now, last class, I think the last thing we were discussing was, well, does it apply in the same manner as it applies to a Jew? And one can bring a proof that it does from the case in the Talmud of the non-Jew who, Dama ben Asina, and the whole story of how he wouldn't wake up his father, even though that meant foregoing an astronomic financial gain. And he would not wake up his father for that. And then, of course, he was rewarded for that. So one can say that there you have it, that even for that, one has to respect and honor and revere his father. But then one can argue and say that that wasn't necessary what he did. He went way above and beyond his obligation. But at any rate, definitely the minimal honor and respect is necessary for a Noachite to give to his parents. And just like in Judaism, every mitzvah has so many laws and details, this too. And let's just suffice by saying that in Jewish law, we learn it out from a verse in the Torah. In Jewish law, a child is basically obligated to obey any and every demand or command of one's parents, so long as they're not instructing the child to go against a Torah law, even if it's rabbinic, not biblical. And at that point, God's respect overrides the parents' respect, because as the wording goes, because both you and your parents are obligated to honor me. So therefore, if a parent were to tell the child to desecrate the Sabbath, then the child would not be permitted to obey the parents. And for that matter, any type of transgression. So presumably, it would be the same thing when it comes to a Noachite commandment, that if a parent would command and demand of their child to break any of the seven Noachite commandments or any of their offshoots, they would not listen to their parents. An interesting question would be, well, what happens if it isn't going against one of the seven, but it is going against a particular stringency or a particular something that the Noachite took upon himself, or let's say it's one of the 613 mitzvahs that a Noachite is permitted to voluntarily keep, and they do keep it, and now the parent is telling them something which is contradictory to that. So in that case, I'm guessing that they would have to listen to their parents, even though the parents are interfering with their service of Hashem. I'm not 100% sure of what I'm saying right now, but that's what I would think. So let's say, for example, a Noachite decided to voluntarily keep a mitzvah. What would be a good example of voluntarily keeping a mitzvah that they could definitely do, no question, and they're doing it as a Noachite, just to get rewarded. Anyone that doesn't have Kedushas Yisrael, the sanctity of Jews.
Bring a burnt offering to the temple.
Okay. All right. Or bring a burnt offering. Okay, so if a Noachite is going to bring an korban oil, a burnt offering, which they're definitely allowed to do that, and the parents tell them not to. So then I think that they would be obligated to obey the parents, and they'd be forbidden from bringing this burnt offering, even though they're interfering with their service and their connection to Hashem, because they're not obligated to bring that offering, and they are obligated to obey their parents. And not necessarily does everything that applies to the Jew in his relationship with his parents apply in the same way to the non-Jew. Like there could be a case where a Jew would be obligated to disobey the parents and a Noachite would have to obey. Or maybe there could be a scenario of vice versa, where a Jew would be obligated to obey his parents and a Noachite would not. But in general, without going into any detail, B'nai Noach are obligated in honoring one's father and mother. And it could be because they accepted it upon themselves. But I want to make it very clear, a very common misconception. I'm sure we all run into this very often. It's not because it's one of the 10 commandments. That's not why Noachites have to keep it. So often when you're talking, or when myself as a Jew am talking to non-Jews, to B'nai Noach that don't know much yet, and I want to introduce them to serving Hashem and the 7 mitzvahs. So many of them say, oh yeah, I know I have to keep the 10 commandments, or I know of the 10 commandments, or I keep the 10 commandments. And then you have to correct them and say, no, actually you don't keep them, because you don't keep them because they're the 10, and you're not allowed to actually keep them because they're part of the 10. For example, Shabbos is one of the 10. And a Noachite is not allowed to keep Shabbos as a Jew does. That would be absolutely forbidden. So don't tell me you keep the 10 commandments. And it happens to be that a bunch overlap, that not to kill and not to steal overlap. So in the same manner, you don't honor your parents because they are part of the 10 commandments. It's a separate obligation. All right, number 18. Page 44, 18. Some authorities are of the opinion that the children of Noah are obligated to fulfill the commandment of giving charity. Others state that it is proper and meritorious for the children of Noah to give charity, but that it is not actually commanded of them. And so everybody agrees that it's a good thing to do. Technically, are they obligated in this same or similar way that a Jew is? That is an argument amongst the authorities. For example, practically speaking, I'm not going to get into how we get to this point, but practically speaking, at the end of the day, a Jew is obligated to give at least what we call meiser, 10% of their earnings to charity of their choice. 10% they have to give. And we're encouraged to give more, but at minimum is 10% of one's earnings. I don't think that a Noachite is obligated to give 10%. Even according to the opinion that says that they are obligated to give charity, doesn't say how much. Or another example, one of the many details of tzedakah, of charity. Biblically speaking, and this is the halacha for a Jew is obligated to give the poor person, the pauper, tzedakah, charity, every time that the poor person asks. If a needy person comes and asks for tzedakah, the Jew is obligated to give him. If it's a Jew that's poor and he's asking, so then the Jew has to give him. If he can, if he has. Many, many details about that. For instance, the onus of proof, if there's any doubt, is on the poor person. The Jew doesn't have to believe that person that he's actually poor. Not anybody who claims to be legally, halachically poor is to be accepted as poor. But if I know him to be poor, I know his financial status, or he has witnesses, or it has been established that he is needy, he is in the category of someone who is poor, and he comes and asks me for tzedakah, I must give him something. If I have nothing to give him at the time, I don't have any cash, and I have nothing to give him, so at least I have to give him words of encouragement, counsel, or something. I have to show him some concern and care. But you're not allowed, a Jew would not be allowed to send away a poor person without anything. Now, I don't think that it applies in the same way for a Noachite. So for instance, what's very common nowadays in certain places is you have so many of these beggars in the streets, stopping cars or standing in between the cars, waiting for handouts of money or food or water or whatever it may be, holding up these little cardboard things saying homeless. And, you feel really bad when you see these people. And so looking at it from a Jewish halachic perspective, one is not obligated to be certain that they are for real. And you have to be careful not to suspect an innocent person, but one doesn't have to be accepting that these people are truly needy. One is allowed to be suspicious to the extent that they don't give them anything. And, or at least not every time you have to give every single one of them. Every time they ask, you're not necessarily obligated to give them. So for the Jew, it's easier because most of these people are not Jewish. So to give tzedakah to a non-Jew is a different category for the Jew, because it's what we call darkei shalom, for peace, for domestic peace, and or ava, in order not to cause any friction or any hatred. So therefore, a Jew gives charity to the non-Jew, but it's not the same obligation. But if there's a poor person who is sitting at, in Israel, or let's say certain places in New York, and they're sitting there, beggars, and they're asking, so really the Jew is obligated to give, and the only, so to say, loophole is, I'm not obligated to truly believe that they are needy. Without passing any judgment, I'm allowed to doubt to the extent that I don't give them anything. But if I know that that person is needy and they ask, so as I said, you have to give. So again, I don't know exactly how to apply all of the nitty-gritty important details, but overall, tzedakah is either obligatory for the Noachite, or at the very least, meritorious and proper, and they should do it. Which again, doesn't say how much, doesn't say how often. One of the many things that is sort of a Jewish custom, but as many things, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach takes it and makes it universally Jewish and brings it to a much higher level than ever. It's a very long list of such things that I can bring as examples. What I'm referring to right now is the Sadaka boxes, the pushka, the charity box. So he did not invent the charity box. No one's going to claim that. However, it traditionally, every Jewish home would have at least one charity box and would give tzedakah, charity, from time to time. Many Jewish women and girls have the custom to give right before they light the Shabbos candles. Otherwise, different times that people give. One of the things that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach has instituted is every Jewish home, and as a matter of fact, even every car, a vehicle, should definitely have a tzedakah pushka in it. And to give tzedakah for the Jew and to even educate our very young children from the youngest age to give tzedakah daily. Now, that's for the Jew. And likewise, I'm not going to say, until someone shows me a clear source, I will not say that he said or wants that every home, even of Noachites, should have a tzedakah box. I'm not going to go that far yet, unless someone shows me that. But surely, it's a good thing. And as we see, that he spoke about it many times, and when people would come for what became the traditional distribution of Sunday dollars, when the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach distributes dollars every Sunday, along with a blessing, and people can have talks and exchange and something like that, many non-Jews would come by as well, and he would give them the money for tzedakah and instruct them and tell them how charity is important, and charity is also important for Noachites, and a lot of Jews that came by, whatever business people are asking for blessings for business, he would oftentimes ask them if they have a charity box in their place of work, in their business. So basically, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach very strongly wants, at least for the Jew, and since we're saying that tzedakah does apply to the non-Jew, he wants that there should be a tzedakah box as a reminder of giving tzedakah, and it should be used in every Jewish home, in every Jewish business. And then actually, I remember exactly when he instituted the idea of permanently attaching it to the wall of the kitchen. Should be in the home, particularly in the kitchen, should be permanently affixed to the wall, so it becomes part of the home. And made a real big deal out of that. And every Jewish child should have their own basic books, like a prayer book, etc., and their own tzedakah pushka, their own tzedakah box. So it's definitely a very important thing, and therefore it would be nice. I'm not saying again that every home has to have a tzedakah box, but definitely non-Jews do give charity, and the more you give, or the more times, as Maimonides puts it, the better. And again, it could be to any worthy cause, either to and again, in Jewish law, it gets very detailed, like every other mitzvah, the order of preference, who to give to first, locally, relatives, people, institutions, the whole thing. So again, I don't know if that exactly applies to the Noachite, especially according to the second opinion, that it is only proper and meritorious. But the idea is you give it to a worthy cause, either to needy people, needy families, or to an institution, whether it would be a hospital, whether it's an educational institution, etc. 19. If a Noachite who follows the 7 universal laws gives charity, the Israelites accept it from him and give it to the poor of Israel, since through the merit of giving charity to the poor among the Jewish people, One is given life by God and saved from death. But a Noachite who does not accept the yoke of the 7 Noachite laws and gives charity is not permitted to give it to the needy of Israel. His charity may be given to poor Noachites only. A very interesting halacha. So first of all, just to clarify, whenever we say of Israel or Israelite, I just, probably know this, but I just, want to make sure. It means what we call today Jew. It has nothing to do with whether you're a citizen or whether you live or whether you were born in the land of Israel. An Israeli is not a non-Jew that was born in Israel and has citizenship in modern day Israel. In halachic terms, Israeli or Israelite or child of Israel is someone who is what we call Jewish, regardless of where they are born or what their birth certificate or passport says. So if someone who keeps Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, they don't have to be a Ger Toishav, but if someone who keeps the 7 Noachite commandments gives the Jewish collector, gives him money, so then that money should be given to the needy Jews, because by doing so, you now have granted the Noachite protection from death and giving him life. And he deserves that blessing. And he's choosing to give tzedakah to whoever this collector wants to give it to. He's not instructing you who to give it to. Therefore, give it to the Jews. Even though that also gets kind of complicated because there's a problem of a poor Jew taking charity from a non-Jew because it doesn't look good for the Jewish community. It looks like the community is not fulfilling their role in a satisfactory manner because he needs to take from Goyim, so therefore it's given to him discreetly or not in public, or in this case, it goes into a general fund. So no one knows who the givers are because he's collected from 100 people and now he's giving it out to 10 poor people. So as long as you don't have that issue, the tzedakah should be given to Jews. But if it's a person who categorically is not keeping the 7 Noachite commandments, they're just a non-Jew, could be a good person, could be not a not yet good person, but right now they did a good deed and they're giving charity. They're giving the Jewish collector money for the poor, again, without specifying anything. Because if they specify something and you do something else with it, then that's a problem called gnevas das, which means being deceitful. And a Jew is not allowed to be deceitful to a Jew nor to a non-Jew. So in business or anything, a Jew can't deceive someone else, depending on what end the Jew is, whether he's the buyer or the seller. He can't deceive the other person, the buyer or the seller, even if they're not Jewish. So as long as there's no element of deceit over here, if this non-Jew, the Gentile who doesn't keep the Sheva Mitzvahs, is giving charity, so then the Jew is obligated to see to give it to some needy non-Jew. You have to give it to some poor person, otherwise it's a form of stealing or at least deceiving him. He gave you money for charity. And to give it to a Jew would be problematic because we don't want to give that Gentile who's not yet keeping Sheva Mitzvahs this extra special bonus of the real mitzvah of tzedakah. That's basically what he's saying in this paragraph. 20, top of page 45. So that was the end of discussion of charity. So it's just 18 and 19. And again, you can spend an entire chapter, if not a whole book, all about tzedakah of a guy.
Any questions about charity?
Any questions at this point that we have about what we discussed? I mean, we covered a lot, but any questions about charity of B'nai Noach? Let me throw out a question. Does a Jew fulfill his mitzvah of giving tzedakah if he gives B'nai Noach? Or let's even say in the times where undebatably or unquestionably there is a ger toishav. If the Jew gives the ger toishav tzedakah, charity, did he fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah or not? Good question. So basically, no. In order, let's put it this, let's start off with the 10%. The Jew is obligated to give Meiser 10%. That 10% has to go to Jews. Now, beyond the 10%, which is already voluntary, which is still the mitzvah of tzedakah, though, still needs to go to Jews. And if he's giving it to the non-Jews, as I mentioned, there'd have to be the other element involved. Either it's to keep peace or not to cause discord, or if it is a ger toishav in the times of the ger toishav, and he lives in Eretz Yisrael, of course, then the Jewish community is obligated to support him. So then yes, then that would fall into a separate category because we are obligated. And as the verse says clearly, what do you do with the nevela, with the meat of non-kosher meat? What would the Jew do with that? His animal died without having a proper ritual slaughtering. So either you sell it to the Nochri, to the Gentile, or you give it to the Ger. And of course, that can't be talking about a Ger Tzedek because he's Jewish. So you give it to the Ger Toishav. Any questions, comments, agreement, disagreement?
No comments, no questions. I was here a little late, so I'm just listening, Rabbi.
Okay. Do you have the book? We're up to number 20 on page 45.
I was listening when you were saying I don't have a book yet. I got to get one.
Okay. Page 45. Okay, now we're going to say now is taken from Maimonides in the first laws, the laws of the foundations of Torah, where he spends several chapters addressing the concept of prophecy. So based on that is what they're saying over here. The laws of foundations of Torah. But they took the liberty to apply it to a Noachide. The Rambam there does not say what we're about to say here. 20. If one of the children of Noah arises and performs a miracle and says that God sent him, then instructs others to add to or subtract from any of the 7 universal laws, or explains them in a way not heard at Mount Sinai, or claims that the 613 commandments given to the Jews are not eternal, but limited to a fixed period of time. Sounds familiar. This person is deemed a false prophet and incurs the death penalty. Okay? So we're saying that it's a non-Jew. If it's a Jew, there's no question. If a Jew arises and does all this, for sure. The, so to say, chidush, the novelty of this paragraph is that they're saying that if a non-Jew, if a Noachide arises and he does it, there's no difference. He is a false prophet, just as there could be a Jewish false prophet. So basically, in the words of the Rambam, the Torah that God gave us at Sinai is eternal. You may not add nor subtract, as the verses say very clearly, to the Torah. And that itself is a whole discussion. The obvious question for anybody who knows a little bit about Jewish tradition and oral tradition and law, etc., is what did the rabbis do? So It's basically very simple. They did a couple of things. What they didn't do is add or subtract. And one will say, really? Let me explain. A, they are making a safeguard. Safeguard. They're instituting rules and regulations. They're being strict, and they're extending the prohibitions simply as a safeguard. Like any law, in any land, in any household. Why do we make rules that children are not allowed to do A, B, and C? Not necessarily because any of those things are problematic, but because it's too dangerous. We don't want them to do that which is really the troubling whatever. So therefore, we make rules to curtail that. And that's how civilization works. That's how countries work. There are laws. Okay. And B, the second type of rabbinic mitzvahs, there are 7 rabbinic mitzvahs. There are holidays that were instituted and made up. Hanukkah, Purim. How could they do that? Again, very good question. And the answer is quite simple. Basically, it all depends on the presentation. It's very, very important. What do they claim when they institute this holiday, this commandment, this ritual, whatever it may be? If they say that there's a new commandment, number 614, God has just given it to us, the prophet told us so, we have prophetic revelation, new mitzvah, that would be transgressing. They're not saying that. They're simply saying, in the second case of Hanukkah and Purim and all that, that we have decided that in order to show our appreciation to God and recognize the miracles that he has done, we are instituting that this is to be kept mandatory. It's not voluntary. We are mandating that you keep these holidays. But again, we're instituting it as the rabbis, so it's rabbinic, and it's in order to. Then, when the Jew is about to perform the mitzvah, he actually says the same blessing that he says before he performs a biblical commandment. Asher kiddushonu b'mitzvaysav, that God has sanctified us with his commandments. Vitzivonu commanded us not only to put on tefillin, to shake the lulav, to hear the shofar, but to light the Hanukkah candle. So first of all blessings were instituted by the rabbis, so that's not such a big deal. But where did God command us to light Hanukkah candles? Because he commanded us to obey whatever the rabbis tell us. And they told us to light Hanukkah candles. But again, it's not that the rabbis have the authority or the power to permanently add or subtract to a mitzvah of the Torah and give it a biblical status. No. And therefore, they don't make festivals where it's forbidden, for example, to do milacha, those works of labor, creation, whatever you can't do on Shabbos. That they don't do. Hanukkah and Purim, they didn't say it's forbidden. They just said, we want you to light candles at this time. We want you to read the Megillah. We want you to give charity. We want you to give food. So what they're doing is sort of, I'm going to exaggerate just for the sake of clarity. Anybody could do any of those things anytime if you're not doing it for the sake of a mitzvah. I could light 8 candles tonight. Why not? What's the big deal? I could give 2 food items to my neighbor as a gift today. Why not? So like, what exactly are they telling us to do that's adding to the Torah? So the whole difference would be is, well, how is it presented? What's the presentation? If I light 8 candles tonight, claiming that this is a biblical requirement, then I've added to the Torah, and that's not allowed. That's a transgression. The Torah doesn't say I have to light any candles tonight. Tomorrow, Friday, the rabbis said to light candles before, Shabbos comes in. So light candles any day. So they said, we're demanding you to light it now. So same thing though, now getting back to the Noachite. If someone comes and claims to be a prophet, could be, God has spoken prophecy. He's given prophecy to non-Jews. As a matter of fact, there's one guy that technically would by no means be considered a law-abiding, Sheva Mitzvahs keeping Ben Noach. And God spoke to him, and he was a real prophet. Who am I talking about? What's his name? Bilaam, right there in the script, in the scriptures, in the Chumash. Right there. In the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, a whole parsha, whole section, parsha of King Balak, and he hired Bilaam. Bilaam was a prophet. And according to the oral tradition, Bilaam did not keep the 7 Noachide commandments, and I won't get into any further detail. And yet God spoke to him. Okay, so the fact that God speaks and gives prophecy to a Noachide, no one has any problem with that. He could do whatever he wants. However, if this prophet claims that God told him to add to the 7 Noachide commandments, not honoring parents and giving charity and a whole bunch of dozens of other things where the Noachites need to do them either because they took it upon themselves or because they are branches or offshoots. However, but if he says, no, there used to be 7 and now there's 8. Now there's 8. Or he takes one away. There used to be 7 and now there's only 6. Then you know he's a false prophet. A Jew can't do that either. A Jewish prophet can't do that. Or if he claims that any one of the 613. So basically, these other religions that we have, where more or less the claim is, talking about the big religions, the ones that are known to all, of course there was a revelation at Sinai. No one's denying that. Of course, the Israelites were the chosen people. And of course, God gave them the Torah with these commandments. However, there came a point where God says, basically, that he changed his mind. Whatever that means, whatever degree, whatever, however you want to, depending on the religion, but basically changed his mind. That is false. And the one who makes that claim, that is a capital offense, and that would be the death penalty. Any questions or comments on that?
Yeah,
Yes.
I've got a question for you there.
Yes.
Now, in one of the earlier Noahide books, I read where Noahides are permitted to have more than one wife.
More than one wife.
Huh?
You said more than one wife?
Yes.
So are Jews.
And-
yes.
Yes, and so are Jews. But there's a rabbinical prohibition for Jews not to do it because of the difficulty involved. And
Okay.
what, that's a couple hundred years old or something like that?
Just over 1,000 years old.
Just over 1,000 years old. Okay. So with that being the case, if Noahides aren't obligated to these Jewish prohibitions, are they? Or do they translate down into the Noahide?
Oh, no. Good example. Because it's very specific. We know exactly who and when made this prohibition. And that's a good example of what I was saying, where it all depends on the presentation. If this rabbi and his court, his name was Rabbeinu Gershoim. If Rabbi Gershoim were to say that God has revealed to me that he's changing the rules and polygamy is forbidden. From now on, it is forbidden. Rabbeinu Gershom would have never said such a thing because he would be, God forbid, transgressing because he is then adding to the Torah. He didn't say that. Made it very clear. And he said that I think it's a really bad idea to allow polygamy to continue. Therefore, he said, I am making a rule. We, the rabbis, are establishing a rule with our power as the authorities that it is forbidden from now on, and anyone who does marry a second wife is to be excommunicated. Now, if a person does take a second wife, the marriage does go into effect, as opposed to if it's biblically forbidden, in most cases, it won't even go into effect. If a man marries his sister, they're not married. What do you mean? He did everything he was supposed to and make it a real legal marriage. Doesn't matter. God said he can't marry her, so therefore the marriage doesn't go into effect. Here, it does go into effect. And when the person wants to, so to say, repent, and he says, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm going to do what the rabbi said, he does need to divorce his second wife, or whichever one he wants to divorce. And it was never accepted universally by all Jews. Rabbeinu Gershom, in the Sephardic community, it never applied, and therefore it continued for hundreds of years after Rabbeinu Gershom made this decree. They continued having more than one wife. There was no problem because he was after the time of the Talmud, and therefore his authority was only for the communities that did accept him and his court. And basically, it was only for the Ashkenazic Jewry. And in the past couple of 100 years or less, it really became accepted by everybody. But less than 100 years ago, there were still some very religious, very fine Sephardic Jews that had more than one wives. So in the Sephardic community, it kind of slowly but surely got accepted, whereas in the Ashkenazi community, boom, that day that he made the decree, he made it. And he made it for, so for the Noachites, no one ever made such a decree. So unless a Noachite says, look, I think it's a good idea to follow the rules that we have to keep anyway of the Jewish people, and since adultery is forbidden for the Noachites, it's one of the 7, and since a Jew is not supposed to have more than one wife, so therefore I think it's a bad idea. That's a wonderful, logical presentation, but it's not binding. So if a Noachite today, besides the fact that it may not be legal in the country or the state that you're in, but putting that aside, if a Noachite today has more than one wife, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, even according to the spirit of the law.
Okay, so I'm going to throw a little curveball here.
Yes.
Does that even apply to Noahites doing sacrifices?
Noachites could bring sacrifices, sure.
Yeah, I'm saying doing actual live sacrifices themselves with the supervision of a rabbi.
So the question is, why isn't it done? That's really, in essence, your question. Because as long as we're speaking theory, 100%. How can I say otherwise? It is absolutely permitted, but the Jew can't participate, can only instruct. So then the question is, so why don't we find that that's being done? All right, so that's a good question. And again, I could present a logical explanation, and I may be onto something, and I may be completely off. And that would be something along the lines that, just like I mentioned about polygamy, there's nothing wrong. But again, each Noachite would feel, well, why should I do it if it's not accepted today? And if the Jews are not doing it, why should I do it? And it might lead to real adultery. So too here, since the Jewish people for nearly 2,000 years have not been able to bring any sacrifices. So if I'm going to do it, it might lead to, and then fill in the blank. But that's just what do you call it? Projecting some, logical argument. I have no basis for what I'm saying.
Well, I think you answered the question the way I was framing it. The question became, are Jews and Noahites technically required to do the same thing, which is, you're saying they weren't from the very beginning. Correct. And this is just kind of putting a nail in that one, is that there are certain things, no, we're not that, but we're allowed to do, but then sometimes it just doesn't make sense to do them. So it's probably best not to do them. that kind of logic that we should form on our own.
Right.
Not that
But
we
again,
have to.
but it's important to make the distinction that I am or I'm not doing this or that because logically. It's very important to make that distinction, not to say that legally, because you don't want to add or subtract. So if you say that, I don't have to bring a sacrifice, I'm not doing it. I don't have to have more than one wife, so I'm not doing it. But, you have to be careful not to say, oh, it's forbidden for a Noachide to have more than one wife. Why are you saying that? You're adding. The rabbis never forbade it. So who's saying that you're not allowed to? You're saying practically it's not a good idea. Fine, so then don't do it. But again, to prove that there's a difference in some of the same commandments, there are different rules for a Noachite and for a Israelite. Not to steal. Okay, you can't steal. But what's the penalty? Very different. The punishment is much different. And, there are other differences within each one of these. Or what's considered adultery? Who is a Noachide permitted to marry and who is he not? So again, we said that it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's only a paternal sibling. But legally, by the letter of the law, if it's only a maternal sibling and they have different fathers, they would be allowed to marry each other. Not saying it's a good idea, but it's not technically transgressing. Whereas for the Jew, doesn't matter how she's his or her sibling, even if it's just maternal or paternal. So there are many differences within the mitzvahs that we do have in common. Yes.
If I understand it correctly, the reason why the Jew does not marry, which one might be permitted?
For the Noachide?
No, for the Jew.
Jew would need their sibling.
Well, one of them is biblical, the other one's rabbinic.
No, they're both biblical. Oh yeah.
But with the polygamy, I understand it was because it would look bad in the European eyes.
1,000 years ago?
Or even today. And if we were to say that if a Noahide were to say that they're allowed to have more than one wife, and
Yes.
society might say, well, gee whiz, these guys are becoming Noahide and they're having more than one wife, that might also,
The danger.
would that become a desecration?
Okay, so the danger. So I don't know if you guys heard what Bob said here. He said there's the concept of maris ayin, where it doesn't look good, and ultimately take that just a couple steps further, and that could lead to, God forbid, a desecration of God's name. For in this case, here is a person who's known to be a religious observer of these 7 divine commandments, and look what he's doing. He's got 2 wives. I mean, in today's society, at least in our part of the world, that is like a, what it looks like, a guy who's got 2 wives. I mean, it'll definitely make the news as soon as anybody hears about it, make the headlines, and it's so inappropriate, it's so not nice, it's so wrong. And so that's the guy, that's how you want us to serve God. So the danger of that logic or that approach is that then you're leaving it up for every individual or for every community, every group to decide what's nice, what's not nice, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And we can't do that.
Well, isn't that what happened here in the United States? I mean, we'll look at Utah, the Mormons. I mean, this is everything you just described happened there. And they still have multiple, polygamy. They practice polygamy in the state, and it's a religion. So, they're in full swing.
I hear you guys, but that doesn't mean that we can forbid it because of that, because then, there's no end to it. If you don't have any clear instructions, so then people don't all have the same opinion. So one person can say, you know what, it's really wrong if you're bringing sacrifices because it doesn't look good. Fine, so don't bring it, but don't make it outlawed. You have to be very careful. Or to say polygamy would really look so bad. Fine, so let's not. But don't make it a rule and say it's forbidden, like for the Jew. You have to be very careful with that. And besides the fact that I don't think I'm not sure. I don't think that back when Rabbeinu Gershom made that decree over 1,000 years ago, that was the history behind it. He actually had 2 wives, and he suffered bitterly. He was conned by one of them big time, and he understood that as a message that if this can happen to him, then it's not a good idea. But I don't think that it was frowned upon or unaccepted in the non-Jewish world at the time. Going back 1,000 years ago, I think most everybody then had more than one wives if they could afford it or whatever.
Well, in the Arab countries.
Well, where was he?
He was in
They
Europe.
still do it
Okay.
in there.
In Europe, over 1,000 years ago, it was unheard of already.
Yeah, it was unheard of, yeah.
When did it become unacceptable in Europe? I don't know the history.
I'm not sure, but definitely by the Middle Ages.
Mhm.
Yep.
But there's actually a whole book which is it's accurate. You know, you have to know what it's in English.
Doesn't the book The Righteous Gentile literally lay out all the rules for marrying
Yeah, we're gonna
multiple
get
women?
that.
It literally talks about. Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole chapter. But there's a book called Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or HaGoyla. It came out, I think, in the early 50s or 40s or something, and it says his whole biography, basically his whole life story. It's written like a novel. It's written for children or young adults, I should say, for teenagers, and it explains the whole background and the whole story. Just parenthetically, just mention, it actually expired a number of years ago, his prohibition, because he made the prohibition for 1,000 years. And it actually, but it was accepted by the Jewish community to just extend it. But technically, it wouldn't be as severe as before it actually expired. But just for the sake of accuracy, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but wasn't too long ago. Whatever, just a number of decades ago that it actually expired. But we don't find that people got all excited about that and said, okay, let's go, marry more, the term, it's actually a biblical term. Going back to the prophets, the term, like what is the relationship between these women that are married to the same man? Like, what are they? So in English, I don't know, is there an American English term for it? They're not in-laws.
They don't exist except in the like.
Okay, so what are they called?
Like sister brides or something.
Sister brides or something. Anyway, the Hebrew word, which is used all the time in the Talmud, but I'm saying it has its origin. It's actually in the Tanakh. They are called sarais. Sarah, not Sarah, not Sarah, but with a tzaddik. Sarah is in the singular and sarais in the plural, which also means problem. So she is my problem, is how they would. That's one translation, one interpretation of the word. These 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 women what are they to each other? Problems. And by Jewish law, they don't get along with each other. They actually hate each other. Practically speaking, in Jewish law, meaning in certain cases we would trust them, and in other cases we wouldn't, and it's all for the same reason, because we assume that they hate each other. For example, if a man needs to be guarded, needs someone to watch him so that he doesn't come to do anything wrong, so you're allowed to use one of these against the other, because she would definitely speak up if he did something wrong. Or if, let's say one of these women were to testify, even though general, we don't accept testimony of women, but there's certain exceptions. So if one of these were to testify against her own tzara, we completely would nix that testimony because we assume that this wonderful, honest, beautiful woman is lying in this case because of who it involves. It's her tzara. So, yeah. All right. 21. There is an oral tradition that the children of Noah are forbidden to interbreed animals of different species or to graft trees of different kinds, although some authorities hold that they are permitted to do either. So again, here you have it, as is the case in so many of the Jewish laws. It's a dispute, an argument in halacha, in the actual law, whether they can or cannot. And therefore, what we say is don't, because we don't have a clear-cut resolution and decision, and it remains on the level of the early authorities as two opinions, so therefore, best to be strict. But if the person transgressed, they would not be punished. And no one says that this is a capital offense. It's not one of the 7, and yet they're not allowed to. And so again, to crossbreed, which is clearly forbidden for the Jew, it's one of the 613, or for that animal to graft trees, to mix those two. However, and this is according to everybody, however, this is a third type of mixture. They may wear sha'atnez, clothing containing both wool and linen, and they may plant different seeds. Not talking about grafting a tree where you take the actual branch and implant it into the trunk, but you're talking about taking seeds, which is very common today. They are allowed to take different seeds, which is called the halachic term, the biblical term is called kilayim, such as grape and wheat in the same field, which are acts forbidden to Jews. Again, in the Torah, this is one of the 613. It's actually pretty strict, pretty severe, that a Jew is not allowed to mix, or he can't even keep too close to each other in the same field unless he has separation, etc. Grapes and wheat. Forbidden interbreeding and grafting are not punishable in courts of law because, again, it's a dispute, and even if it would be forbidden, there's no punishment. So even according to the opinion, if we were to follow that it is absolutely forbidden, but there's no punishment, no flogging, no financial penalty, and surely no death penalty. But it would be best not to do it because there are those opinions that say that it is forbidden. So again, interbreeding and grafting, those are the only two things. So shatnez, wearing a garment that has both wool and linen, everybody agrees is fine and permitted for the non-Jew. Even for the ger toishav, there's no problem. They need not refrain from shatnez. And again, the question is, well, can they take this upon themselves as a mitzvah that they want to voluntarily keep? I would assume yes, especially since it's a negative commandment. So it's not like you're doing something. Forget about the idea of the Jew, Kedushas Yisrael, the sanctity of a Jew, like writing a Sefer Torah or putting on the tefillin or the mezuzah. Here, you're not actively, you're intentionally and consciously not doing something. You're abstaining from wearing such a garment. So I don't see that as a problem. But again, that is clearly not obligatory according to anybody. It would just be, like we said, voluntarily. And then according to the Rambam, he would receive reward as one who's not commanded and doing something voluntarily. And that would be shatnez. Any questions about that? Okay, there actually are differences whether it's in the land of Israel.
I do have a quick question, Rabbi. So
Yes.
so this gene splicing and all of this stuff they're doing with all these new medical advances where they're taking animal genes and splicing them into human genes, trying to create better healing medicines and stuff. That's kind of murky water there. I mean, how do you know that that's not happening if you're dealing with medical people, and then you have to be careful that the person doing this understands that this is not something you would want your family member to go under.
It's a whole world of complication, and especially for the Jew, and also for the Noahide, who's not allowed to crossbreed, it becomes very, very complicated. Nowadays, we have issues and questions that have never needed to have been addressed. Literally the past few years or even months, but even before that, just the past couple of decades, when all of this with cloning and all these things just was beginning, or a person to go through surgically and change their gender, all of these things were unheard of. What the Talmud does speak a lot about is a person was born with both male and female organs, or a person who's born with not knowing whether they're male or female because of, let's say, a piece of skin or something is covering it from birth. That is discussed a lot. But what's happening today, it was unheard of. So someone, a few decades ago, not too long ago, put out a whole book, some rabbi, and based on all of the rabbinic literature, based on the Talmud and then the later rabbis, he deals with various different questions, which already today is almost outdated because of all the new things that are coming up. And he gave it a very funny name that if you understand the Hebrew and the verse, you'd appreciate it. He calls it Dor Ta'apuchos, which means upside down or backwards or inside out generation. And it's a direct quote. Those two words are from the Chumash, from the book of Deuteronomy, which says Dor Ta'apuchos. But in this case, it's so unfortunate, so literal of the gender change. So he goes into all sorts of questions for the Jew. Is the person the original gender or the new gender or both or neither? What do you do as far as all the mitzvahs? If it was a man and became a woman, does he still obligated to do the mitzvahs of the men? Can you count him as a minion out of one of the 10 people? And it just goes on and on and on and on. But nowadays, there are very serious issues, the things which are factual. And then if you bring into it things which are, well, I don't want to say factual, even though some people think they are, but let's say you have what do you call it? The conspiracies or conspiracy theories, I should say. Once you start with that, then it's really never ending. For example, and there's much more. For example, without getting into the whole debate and whole argument about the so-called vaccine of what they call the COVID-19. So what exactly is the vaccine? The vaccine is definitely different than other vaccines of other things that used to exist back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, whatever it was, the polio, all the different things. It's different than that. Some claim, again, I don't know how some can claim it either it is or it isn't. Some claim that it is taken from a fetus, and it has to be from a live fetus, which basically, long story short, the way that these people are presenting it is that it's from abortion. It's from a child which is aborted. It can't be from a stillbirth. It can't be from after the baby was born. It's from a child which is aborted. So abortion is forbidden. That's murder. So how can we make a vaccine from something which in order to do it is a sin of murder? So the only argument offhand would be that in order to save a life, there's a concept called pikuach nefesh. If someone's life is in danger, then you must do what it takes to save the life. Shabbos, a person must desecrate the Shabbos, and it's not a desecration of the Shabbos to save the person's life. It happens every Shabbos. Everyone should be protected and healthy, but people make phone calls, drive, and operations, whatever needs to be done to save the life. So here too, the problem with that is, and I've never heard anybody use that argument, I'm just putting it out there. The problem is then you run into the factor of it needs to be immediate danger, even it doesn't have to be certain life-threatening, but it has to be enough that it is a doubt it might be life-threatening, but it has to be something that's in front of you. It can't be that because a certain percentage of people that get this virus will lose their life, and because, therefore, and because, so then you now make it a generic thing to give everyone this. I don't think by Jewish law that argument would hold water. It's too far-fetched. That's like saying that the Jew is allowed to get into a car, drive to the hospital, write and sign all the documents necessary, and get the injection and not wait until Sunday. Because if they get the virus today and not tomorrow, and they didn't get the protection, then no one is saying that. None of the extreme pro-vaccination are saying that. So the same thing, if in fact it is coming from a fetus, so you have to take into consideration all of the details of the percentages. What percentage of this, what percentage of that, what percent, it gets very, very, very detailed, such as any other activity, like what's considered forbidden or dangerous. Many things have an element of danger to them. To drive in a car, in a vehicle, there is danger, statistically speaking, the numbers, and yet it's permitted. Some argue you must wear a seatbelt. And if not, some say that you're actually transgressing the law of guarding yourself. Others say, no, it's only advisable and suggested. You don't have to wear a seatbelt, even if it's the law of the land. We're speaking about from Jewish law. What about flying in an airplane? How about can a person voluntarily dive out of an airplane for fun? Is that okay? What about going skiing? All this recreation, it's driving a car, going on an airplane, that has a purpose. So you're doing something which has an element of danger for a purpose. But how about just strictly for fun? So there's so many things, and this is all addressed in Jewish law. So, I don't know, I went off onto a tangent based on, you started me off, but it's a good point. There's like
James has a question.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Rabbi Turin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Alrighty, wonderful. So my question, and if it's too detailed, that's fine. We can move on. But when it comes to of its kind or whatever it says in the Hebrew, when it comes to like tree grafting, a lot of trees today are grafted with what are called stock trees, and it might not necessarily be the same species as the fruit that is being produced by the grafts. Or maybe it's a same species, but a different variety. Do you know the detail in the Hebrew, what it says there when it says like its kind?
It says min, which would mean its kind. And so two things. One, even if for a Jew, it would be forbidden because it's considered two different kinds, it doesn't necessarily mean, as we mentioned before, that the same exact rule applies in this mitzvah to the Noachite who has to keep the same mitzvah. That's A. And secondly, it may be permitted for a Jew as well, because there's so many different kinds, like within apples itself, it's one of the common things you ask a person, how many different types of apples do you think there are? So the person thinks about 10. So they tell them try over 100, so there's so many different species in things which seem so the same and so similar. So I don't know, but I do know. Yes.
Only one apple.
Well,
It's an apple tree.
and what are the rest?
if a person were to graft between apple trees, Macintosh and
Yeah.
red,
Yeah,
delicious.
yeah.
Would that be okay?
I don't know. No, I'm not sure. They're two different apples. No. For example, for the Shechianu blessing, if a person ate one type and now he has another type, he would make a Shechianu if he hasn't had that type.
That's that.
Yeah, for example.
So, yeah,
But I do know, as someone who is somewhat of an authority, there's one of the top kosher certifications in the world today is Rabbi Landau of Bnei Brak. It's actually the son. He took over his father's position, and his father took over his father's position. So the original Rabbi Landau was a very big expert, and his son, in modern times, became even in certain areas a bigger expert, not in the halacha part. The halacha, the grandfather was the biggest expert, but in the actual knowledge of the science and all that. And his top, what's the word in English for a doctor of trees? There's
arborist or
no. It's one of these long technical words. He is he's got a degree in this. He's oh man, forgot, it slipped my mind. It's a certain term, which is the word for a professional, tree doctor. So he actually works for Rabbi Landau, and I know him well, and he's an expert in this area, not so much in the halacha, although by now he does know a lot, but in the differences, and then he presents it to Rabbi Landau and explains it to him, and then Rabbi Landau, with his knowledge of the Torah, so between the two of them, they can explain it. It's Rabbi Kaplan, Rabbi Zev Kaplan, whose son, Yoel, is part of our community here, the big tall guy who used to go to India from time to time, Yoel Kaplan.
yes,
So
definitely.
So his father, Zev, who's an American, lives in Kfar Chabad in Israel. He is Rabbi Landau's top, because Rabbi Landau has different people for different areas of expertise. He has a chemist. So he is his man for, I forget what it's called, for the trees. So his main area
Arboriculturalist.
is, what is it?
Arboriculturalist.
The specific name for
All right.
trees.
Huh.
Something. Of course, it ends with,
Ologist or-
Yeah, that's how it ends. But it's a.
Alrighty.
Whatever.
Well, I think I can get a hold of Yoel. I appreciate that.
Yeah, he's actually in Israel right now, but you can email him or whatever
Sure.
and ask his father. His father will be more than happy to talk to you or give you whatever information.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, so we are looking, Mirz Hashem, at next week at the regular time, 8:00 Chicago time.
Okay, thank you.